The first scream tore through Ashbourne Manor just after midnight. It echoed down the candlelit corridor and vanished into the storm beyond the windows. Charlotte Blackwood gripped the edge of the bed as another wave of pain rolled through her body. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled. Outside, snow lashed against the glass in furious bursts, driven by a winter wind that seemed determined to shake the old manor from its foundations. The room smelled faintly of lavender oil and burning coal. Shadows flickered across the walls as the fire struggled against the draft creeping beneath the door. A maid hurried to her side with a fresh cloth. Another adjusted the blankets. The physician stood near the hearth, his face calm but serious. Charlotte closed her eyes for a moment. She had imagined this night countless times. During quiet afternoons spent sewing tiny gowns. During lonely evenings by the nursery fire. During every sleepless hour when she rested a hand upon her growing stomach and wondered whether the child inside her would inherit his father's gray eyes. In every version of that dream, Nathaniel had been there. Not speaking much, not smiling often, but there, standing beside her, holding her hand, sharing the moment their child entered the world. Instead, his place remained empty. The armchair near the fireplace sat untouched. The tea prepared hours ago had long since gone cold. Charlotte forced herself upright as another contraction tightened through her body. A sharp gasp escaped her lips. "Your Grace," whispered her maid, Emily, her voice trembling with concern. "Please try to breathe." Charlotte nodded. She focused on the fire, on the crackling wood, on anything except the growing ache spreading through her. Somewhere beyond the room, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. The door opened. A young footman entered, snow clinging to his coat and boots. His face was pale from the cold. He looked toward the housekeeper standing near the doorway. "No word from London," he said quietly. Silence settled over the room. Charlotte felt it immediately, even through the pain, even through the exhaustion. The housekeeper lowered her eyes. The physician looked away. No one spoke. No one needed to. Charlotte already understood. Nathaniel was still not coming. Earlier that evening, before the labor had fully begun, they had sent the first messenger. Then another. Then a third. Each had ridden through worsening weather toward London. Each carried urgent instructions. The Duchess of Ashbourne was in labor. The child was coming. The Duke must return at once. Hours had passed. No answer had arrived. Emily adjusted Charlotte's pillow. Her movements were gentle, careful, almost fearful. "Perhaps the roads are blocked, Your Grace." Charlotte managed a faint smile. It did not reach her eyes. Perhaps. Yet she knew what the servants whispered when they thought she could not hear. She knew exactly where Nathaniel Blackwood was. He was in London, with Clara Hastings. The name had followed her for months now, appearing in conversations that stopped when she entered a room, appearing in newspaper mentions and society gossip, appearing in every silence Nathaniel left behind. Another contraction struck. Charlotte gripped the blanket. Her vision blurred for a moment. The physician stepped closer. "You are doing well, Duchess." She nodded again. She had become very good at nodding, very good at remaining composed, very good at hiding disappointment. 5 years of marriage had taught her that skill. The storm rattled the windows. A clock somewhere downstairs chimed 1 in the morning. Charlotte's gaze drifted toward the empty chair once more. It had become impossible not to look at it. The absence felt larger than the furniture itself. Felt like a wound. Her thoughts wandered despite herself. Back to another winter, another ballroom, another night that had changed everything. She had been 22 years old when she first met Nathaniel Blackwood, Duke of Ashbourne, one of the most powerful men in England. She remembered standing near a marble column at Lady Fairmont's Christmas ball. She remembered the orchestra, the candles, the endless swirl of silk and conversation. Most of all, she remembered his eyes, cool gray, observant, impossible to read. He had asked her for a dance, just one. Yet somehow that single dance had altered the course of her life. She had mistaken his quiet nature for depth, his restraint for gentleness, his distance for mystery. She had not understood then that some walls were not waiting to be crossed. Some walls were built to remain standing forever. A sharp pain dragged her back to the present. Charlotte pressed a trembling hand against her stomach. The child moved, strong, determined. Tears threatened to rise unexpectedly. Not from fear, not from pain, from loneliness. The realization settled heavier with every passing hour. Their child would enter the world exactly as she had lived most of her marriage. Waiting for Nathaniel. Waiting for attention. Waiting for affection. Waiting for something that never quite arrived. The door opened again. This time it was Mrs. Whittaker, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Blackwood family for nearly 40 years. Snow dusted her dark shawl. Her expression was troubled. Emily looked up immediately. "Any news?" Mrs. Whittaker hesitated. The answer was visible before she spoke. A rider arrived from the inn near Cambridge. The room grew still. Charlotte felt her heartbeat quicken. "And?" asked Emily. Mrs. Whittaker swallowed. "His Grace was seen in London yesterday evening." No one moved. No one breathed. "With Miss Hastings." The words landed softly, yet they seemed louder than the storm itself. Charlotte lowered her eyes. There it was. Confirmation. Not rumor. Not speculation. Fact. Nathaniel had received no less than 3 urgent messages. He knew she was due any day. He knew the child could arrive at any time. Yet he remained in London. With another woman. Emily looked horrified. Surely there must be some mistake. Mrs. Whittaker remained silent. The silence answered everything. Charlotte stared at the fire. The flames blurred slightly. She refused to cry. Not now. Not in front of everyone. Not again. She had shed enough tears during the first years of marriage. Enough tears after cancelled dinners. Missed anniversaries. Empty promises. The supply had long since run dry. Another contraction seized her, more powerful than the last. The physician immediately stepped forward. The room sprang into motion around her. Yet beneath the activity, beneath the voices and instructions, one thought remained stubbornly fixed in Charlotte's mind. Nathaniel was not coming. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time no longer felt reliable. The storm continued. The pain continued. The waiting continued. Then suddenly another messenger arrived. Young, breathless, covered in snow. Hope stirred briefly within the room. He removed his hat, lowered his gaze. "No sign of the Duke, Your Grace." Something inside Charlotte finally went quiet. Not broken, not shattered, simply still. She looked toward the window where darkness pressed against the glass. Beyond that darkness lay miles of snow-covered roads. Beyond those roads lay London. Beyond London lay Nathaniel. She imagined him sitting beside Clara Hastings, speaking softly, offering comfort, giving his attention to someone else while his wife fought to bring their child into the world alone. The thought should have hurt more. Instead, it felt strangely distant, like touching an old scar. Familiar, expected. The physician approached once more. His expression had become more serious. "Your Grace, we must conserve your strength." Charlotte nodded. The next contraction arrived almost immediately. She gripped Emily's hand. The young maid winced but did not pull away. "You are not alone," Emily whispered. Charlotte managed a faint smile. It was kind of the girl to say so, but they both knew the truth. In the way that mattered most, she was entirely alone. Another hour passed. Then another. Snow continued to fall. The fire burned lower. Servants came and went. Somewhere deep within the manor, the grandfather clock marked the passing night. Charlotte no longer watched the door, no longer listened for hoofbeats, no longer expected miracles. At last, Mrs. Whittaker moved closer and gently touched her shoulder. "Your Grace," she said softly, "shall we send another messenger?" Charlotte stared ahead. Her gaze settled once more upon the empty chair beside the fireplace. The chair prepared for her husband. The chair that had remained empty all night. The chair that seemed destined to remain empty until morning. She took a slow breath. Then another. Finally, she shook her head. "No." Mrs. Whittaker blinked. "Your Grace." Charlotte's eyes remained fixed on the chair. Her voice was calm, steady, far steadier than she felt. "Do not send anyone else." The room fell silent. Even the storm seemed to pause. Charlotte lowered a trembling hand to her stomach. The child moved beneath her palm. A small reminder that she was not enduring this night for herself alone. She swallowed hard. Then she whispered the words that would haunt Nathaniel Blackwood for the rest of his life. Do not call for him anymore. The storm remained relentless. Snow swept across the dark countryside in white sheets, erasing roads, fences, and landmarks beneath a frozen veil. Ashbourne Manor stood alone against the winter night, its tall windows glowing faintly like distant lanterns. Inside the Duchess's chamber, the hours crawled forward. Charlotte lay exhausted against the pillows. Her face had grown pale. Strands of chestnut hair clung to her temples despite the cool air. Every breath demanded effort. Every passing minute seemed to stretch endlessly. The physician moved quietly about the room, consulting with the midwife who had arrived shortly after midnight. Emily remained beside the bed, refusing to leave even when ordered to rest. The young maid kept a damp cloth ready and spoke only when necessary. Charlotte appreciated the silence. She no longer had strength for conversation. The pain came and went like waves crashing against a shore. Sometimes the intervals gave her a few moments of peace. During those brief stretches, she found herself drifting backward through memories she had spent years trying not to examine. It was easier now. Perhaps because the child was coming. Perhaps because there was no longer any point in pretending. 5 years earlier she had believed marriage would eventually soften Nathaniel Blackwood. Everyone said it would. Society admired him. Servants respected him. Business partners trusted him. Even strangers spoke of his honor. Yet honor and affection were not the same thing. She had learned that lesson slowly, one disappointment at a time. The first year of marriage had not been entirely unhappy. Nathaniel had been distant, certainly, formal, reserved. Yet she had convinced herself he simply needed time. Their wedding had been arranged through family connections. Affection could grow later. At least that was what every older woman had assured her. She remembered their first Christmas at Ashbourne Manor. She had spent weeks preparing the celebration. The dining room had been decorated with evergreen garlands. Candles lined every mantel. Gifts had been carefully selected for the servants and tenants. She had hoped the holiday might bring them closer together. Nathaniel had arrived home late that evening. Snow covered his coat. He looked tired from travel. Charlotte had greeted him at the front entrance with a hopeful smile. He had thanked her politely for organizing everything. Then he had disappeared into his study and remained there until midnight. She had eaten Christmas dinner alone. At the time she told herself it was temporary. Work obligations, estate concerns, important matters. There was always an explanation. There always seemed to be another reason, another delay, another promise that tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow rarely was. Another contraction tightened through her body. Charlotte inhaled sharply. The midwife encouraged her gently. Emily squeezed her hand. The pain eventually eased. Charlotte closed her eyes. The memory continued. During their second year of marriage, she had begun writing letters to Nathaniel whenever he traveled. Not formal correspondence. Not reports about the estate. Real letters. Small observations about daily life. Thoughts she never seemed able to express aloud. Stories from the village. News about the gardens. Questions about his travels. At first she waited eagerly for replies. Some arrived. Most did not. Eventually she stopped expecting them. Nathaniel never appeared intentionally cruel. That almost made it worse. Cruelty could be confronted, could be named. His indifference simply settled into every corner of their life until it became normal. She remembered one summer afternoon when she had fallen from her horse during a ride through the western meadow. The injury had been minor, nothing serious, yet she had spent 3 days confined to bed. Nathaniel had been home the entire time. He visited once. For less than 5 minutes. He asked whether the physician had been consulted. She said yes. He nodded and left. That evening Charlotte had cried after he was gone. Not because she was hurt, because she had realized she expected more from a stranger than from her own husband. The fire crackled softly in the hearth. Shadows danced across the ceiling. The storm outside showed no sign of weakening. Emily adjusted the blanket again. "Are you comfortable?" she whispered. Charlotte almost laughed. Comfort felt like a distant memory. Instead she nodded. Emily offered a grateful smile. The girl had always been easy to reassure. Another hour passed. Then another. The physician's expression grew increasingly focused. The midwife remained calm but vigilant. Charlotte noticed every glance they exchanged, every careful movement. Fear threatened to creep into her thoughts. She pushed it away. Fear would not help the child. Fear would not bring Nathaniel home. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. Footsteps echoed briefly through the corridor. Mrs. Whitaker appeared once more. Her face carried the weary look of someone who had spent the entire night worrying. She approached the bed quietly. "There is still no word, Your Grace." Charlotte did not answer immediately. She had not asked for an update. She had not wanted one. Yet hearing the confirmation still stung. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated. "The roads are becoming difficult. Several of the men think the storm may continue through morning." Charlotte looked toward the dark window. "Then there is little reason to expect visitors." The housekeeper lowered her eyes. "No, Your Grace." Another silence followed. Mrs. Whitaker remained standing for a moment before speaking again. "Forgive me for saying so, but perhaps His Grace simply does not know the urgency." Charlotte almost smiled at the effort to defend him. Everyone in the house seemed determined to protect the Duke's reputation. Even now. Especially now. "He knows," Charlotte said softly. Mrs. Whitaker said nothing. There was nothing to argue. Everyone understood the truth. Nathaniel had known this day was approaching for weeks. He had chosen to remain elsewhere. The realization no longer felt sharp. Felt heavy, like carrying a stone for so long that one eventually forgot life without it. As dawn slowly approached, the room grew quieter. Exhaustion settled over everyone. Emily fought to stay awake. The physician reviewed his instruments. The midwife prepared fresh linens. Charlotte stared into the fire and remembered another evening from nearly a year earlier. It had been autumn. The leaves had already begun changing color. Nathaniel had returned from London after a month away. Charlotte had been waiting in the drawing room when he arrived. She remembered the excitement she felt. Foolish excitement, perhaps, yet genuine. She had discovered she was expecting a child only 3 days before. She had spent hours imagining how she would tell him. When Nathaniel entered the room, she noticed something unusual immediately. He seemed distracted. More distracted than usual. His thoughts were elsewhere. She delivered the news anyway. Quietly, carefully. She expected surprise. Perhaps even happiness. Instead, he had simply stared at her for several seconds. Then he nodded. "I see." Those 2 words. Nothing more. No questions. No smile. No visible excitement. Only a polite acknowledgement. Later that night, Charlotte had sat alone in the nursery room that was still empty. She remembered placing a hand over her stomach and promising the child that it would be loved. Enough for 2 parents if necessary. The memory lingered painfully now. She wondered whether she had already failed that promise. Another contraction arrived. Stronger than before. Charlotte gripped the sheets. The midwife immediately stepped closer. "Very good, Duchess," she said gently. "Stay with us." Charlotte nodded through clenched teeth. Sweat dampened her forehead despite the cold air. Time blurred again. The room faded in and out around her. Voices came and went. Instructions were given. Water was brought. Towels were changed. Yet one thought remained fixed beneath everything else. Nathaniel was not here. The father of her child was somewhere in London. With Clara Hastings. Charlotte had never met the woman. Only heard her name. Only listened to whispers. Some claimed Clara was beautiful. Others claimed she was brilliant. A few suggested she and Nathaniel shared an unusually close friendship. Society always found reasons to speculate. Charlotte had tried not to care. She had failed. Not because she believed Nathaniel capable of scandal, but because he gave Clara something he had never given his wife. His attention. The eastern sky beyond the windows slowly began to lighten. Not sunrise yet. Only the first suggestion of approaching dawn. The longest night of Charlotte's life was nearing its end. Whether she welcomed that end or feared it, she could no longer tell. Emily suddenly leaned closer. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Your Grace," she whispered. "When the baby arrives, everything will be different." Charlotte looked at the young woman. The innocence behind those words touched her more than she expected. Emily still believed life changed because it should, because good things deserved happy endings. Charlotte had once believed that too. Still, she reached for the girl's hand. "Perhaps," she said quietly. Then she turned her gaze toward the empty chair beside the fireplace. It remained untouched, waiting, just as it had all night, just as she had waited for years. And for the first time, Charlotte wondered whether she was finally growing tired of waiting at all. A pale gray dawn finally emerged beyond the frost-covered windows. The storm had weakened, though snow still drifted lazily across the estate grounds. Ashbourne Manor stood silent beneath its white blanket, unaware that within its walls a new life was preparing to enter the world. Charlotte could barely distinguish 1 hour from the next. The night had stretched so long that time itself seemed to have dissolved. Her body ached with exhaustion. Every muscle felt strained. Every breath demanded concentration. Yet through the haze of fatigue, one instinct remained stronger than all the others. Protect the child. The midwife leaned close, her voice calm and reassuring. "You are doing beautifully, Duchess. Stay with me." Charlotte nodded weakly. Her hand remained locked around Emily's. The poor girl had not complained once despite the pressure. Mrs. Whittaker stood near the foot of the bed, her hands clasped tightly together as though prayer alone might carry them through the morning. The physician checked his pocket watch and exchanged a glance with the midwife. Neither spoke aloud, but Charlotte noticed the concern passing between them. She noticed everything now. Pain had a strange way of sharpening certain details while blurring everything else. The fire had burned low. Fresh logs crackled softly as a servant replenished it. Steam rose from a basin of hot water. The scent of lavender had long since faded beneath the smell of candles and coal. Charlotte turned her head slightly. The empty chair remained where it had been all night, waiting beside the fireplace, waiting for a man who had never come. A fresh contraction struck, stronger than any before it. Charlotte gasped and closed her eyes. The room seemed to tilt around her. Voices faded into distant echoes. For a brief moment she felt suspended somewhere between memory and reality. She saw her mother's face. She had been only 12 when her mother died. Yet certain memories remained vivid. A gentle hand brushing hair from her forehead. A soft voice reading stories by candlelight. A warm embrace after a difficult day. Charlotte had spent years missing that comfort. Now, as she prepared to become a mother herself, the absence felt sharper than ever. "You are stronger than you think," her mother had once told her. Charlotte held onto that memory now. She needed it. Another hour passed, or perhaps less. No one seemed interested in measuring time anymore. The room revolved entirely around one purpose: the child. Emily wiped Charlotte's forehead. Tears filled the young maid's eyes. "I wish His Grace were here." Charlotte opened her eyes slowly. She looked at the girl for a long moment. Then she surprised herself by answering honestly. "So did I." It was the first time she had admitted it aloud. Not because anyone doubted it. Everyone knew. Yet speaking the words made something inside her settle. The hope she had carried through the night finally loosened its grip. Nathaniel was not riding through the storm. He was not rushing home at the last moment. He was not about to appear in the doorway and make everything right. That fantasy belonged to another woman. A younger woman. A woman who still believed disappointment was temporary. Charlotte no longer believed that. Another wave of pain arrived. Then another. The midwife's instructions grew more focused. The physician moved closer. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Urgency replaced waiting. Everyone understood the moment was near. Charlotte's thoughts drifted unexpectedly toward the nursery. She had spent months preparing it. The walls had been painted a soft cream color. Tiny embroidered blankets waited neatly folded inside a cedar chest. A rocking chair stood near the window. On the shelf above it sat several storybooks she hoped to read one day. She remembered sitting there alone only 2 weeks earlier. Her hand resting upon her stomach. Snow falling outside. Wondering what kind of person her child would become. Would the baby inherit Nathaniel's intelligence? His calm nature? His stubborn silence? The thought almost made her smile despite the circumstances. Then another memory surfaced. One from only a few months earlier. Nathaniel had been home for 3 days between trips to London. 3 days. The longest stretch they had spent under the same roof in months. Charlotte remembered gathering enough courage to ask him a simple question during dinner. Have you thought about names? Nathaniel looked up from the document he had been reading. Names? For the baby. He blinked as though the subject had caught him off guard. Then he returned his attention to the papers. I am certain you will choose appropriately. That had been the entire conversation. She remembered sitting there afterward, staring at the untouched food on her plate, realizing she cared more about his answer than she wanted to admit, realizing she always would. The memory hurt less now than it once had. Perhaps because the hurt had become familiar, like an old companion that no longer required introduction. Suddenly the midwife's voice broke through her thoughts. Duchess, stay with us. Charlotte focused immediately. The room had grown blurry again. Her pulse raced. The physician moved closer than before. Concern darkened his expression. Mrs. Whitaker quietly crossed herself. Charlotte understood then that the situation was becoming more difficult. Not dangerous, not yet, but difficult. Fear finally crept into her chest. Not for herself, for the child. Her hand instinctively moved toward her stomach. Please, she whispered. Emily leaned closer. What is it? Charlotte swallowed. Her throat felt dry. The baby. Emily immediately squeezed her hand. Everything will be all right. Charlotte wanted to believe her. She truly did. The next hour became a haze of effort and determination. The world narrowed until only a few things remained. Voices, breathing, light, pain, hope. Somewhere within that storm of sensations, Charlotte discovered a strength she did not know she possessed. The same strength that had carried her through years of loneliness. The same strength that had taught her how to smile through disappointment. The same strength that allowed her to love despite receiving so little in return. And finally, just after sunrise, a sound shattered the silence. A cry. Small, fragile, perfect. For one heartbeat, the entire room froze. Then emotion swept through everyone at once. Emily burst into tears. Mrs. Whitaker covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Even the physician smiled. Charlotte lay motionless. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. She stared upward, struggling to process what she had heard. Then the cry came again. Stronger this time. Real. The midwife's face softened with relief. Congratulations, Duchess. Charlotte felt tears gather unexpectedly. Not tears of sadness. Not entirely. Something deeper. Something larger than grief. A healthy boy, the midwife whispered. The words seemed to echo through the room. A healthy boy. Her son. Their son. The child she had carried for months. The child she had already loved long before seeing his face. The midwife carefully wrapped the infant in a warm blanket and carried him toward the bed. Charlotte's heart trembled. The tiny bundle seemed impossibly small. Tiny fingers. Tiny features. Tiny breaths. Yet somehow he already felt like the most important person she had ever known. The moment the baby was placed in her arms, the world changed. Everything else faded. The storm. The loneliness, the empty chair, the disappointment, all of it receded for a brief, precious moment. Charlotte looked down into the face of her son. His eyes remained closed. One small hand escaped the blanket and curled instinctively against her gown. A sob caught in her throat. Hello, she whispered. The baby's fingers moved slightly. Charlotte smiled through tears. I have been waiting for you. Emily turned away to hide her crying. Mrs. Whitaker openly wiped her eyes. Even the physician looked suspiciously emotional. Charlotte barely noticed. She could not stop staring at the child. At Benjamin. The name came to her immediately. She did not need anyone else's approval. She did not need Nathaniel's permission. Benjamin. Strong. Steady. Kind. Everything she hoped he would become. The room gradually settled. Fresh blankets were arranged. The fire was rebuilt. Quiet conversation resumed. Charlotte remained lost in the wonder of holding her son, until a sudden movement near the fireplace caught her attention. A servant entered carrying fresh logs. As he opened the iron grate, Charlotte noticed something unusual among the ashes. A partially burned piece of paper. Just a corner, barely visible beneath the blackened embers. The servant did not seem to notice it. Neither did anyone else. Charlotte frowned slightly. Something about it felt strange. Important somehow. Yet she was too exhausted to think clearly. The servant closed the grate. The paper disappeared from view. Charlotte looked down at Benjamin once more. His tiny face rested peacefully against the blanket. A faint smile touched her lips. For the first time in many hours, genuine peace settled over her heart. Nathaniel was absent. The chair remained empty. The disappointment remained real. Yet her son was here, safe, alive, loved. Outside, the storm finally began to clear. And deep within the dying embers of the fireplace, the edge of a burned letter waited silently among the ashes. London woke beneath a blanket of gray clouds and melting snow. The storm that had battered the countryside all night had reached the city only as cold rain. Water slid down the tall windows of a Georgian townhouse in Mayfair, blurring the view of carriages and hurried pedestrians below. Inside, the atmosphere could not have been more different from the quiet joy that had filled Charlotte's chamber at dawn. A fire burned steadily in the drawing room. Several lamps remained lit despite the morning hour. Books, correspondence, and medical journals covered nearly every available surface. Nathaniel Blackwood stood near the window with his back to the room. His dark coat was wrinkled. His cravat sat slightly loose. Signs of exhaustion marked his face. He had not slept properly in nearly 3 days. Behind him, a young woman rested upon a chaise lounge positioned near the fire. Clara Hastings appeared fragile enough to vanish into the cushions. Her normally vibrant features had become pale from illness. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. A blanket covered her shoulders despite the warmth of the room. A physician sat nearby, carefully reviewing notes written during the night. Nathaniel had spent most of the previous 48 hours in this room. He had barely left except to send instructions and speak briefly with servants. Every few minutes his attention returned to Clara. Every cough, every shift in her breathing, every sign of discomfort immediately drew his concern. The physician finally closed his notebook and removed his spectacles. Her fever has broken. Relief flickered across Nathaniel's expression. It was brief but unmistakable. You are certain? The physician nodded. The worst appears to be behind her now. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. The tension in his shoulders eased for the first time in days. Clara managed a faint smile from the chaise. You look more relieved than I feel. Nathaniel crossed the room immediately. You should not be speaking. There you are again. Her smile widened slightly. Ordering everyone about. Because no one listens unless I do. Clara laughed softly before a cough interrupted her. Nathaniel instinctively reached for the glass of water resting beside her. He handed it over without hesitation. The physician observed the interaction quietly. Society would have found the scene scandalous. A duke spending days beside an unmarried woman. A beautiful young woman at that. Rumors would have flourished if witnessed by the wrong people. Yet the reality lacked every element society preferred to imagine. There was no romance in the room, no secret affection, only concern, responsibility, history. Clara accepted the water and took a small sip. You should go home. Nathaniel frowned immediately. We have discussed this, and you ignored me exactly as expected. Your condition only improved this morning. Clara rolled her eyes. I am not dying. You nearly were. The words escaped more sharply than intended. Silence followed. Clara's expression softened. Nathaniel looked away. He rarely revealed emotion, even less often in front of others. Yet the last 3 days had tested every reserve of composure he possessed. Clara had collapsed unexpectedly during a charity event. The fever appeared within hours. By the following morning, her condition had worsened enough to alarm everyone around her. Nathaniel had cancelled meetings, ignored invitations, remained by her side while physicians came and went. There had been no hesitation. There never would have been. Clara watched him carefully. You still blame yourself. Nathaniel said nothing. Nathaniel. Her voice gentled. None of this was your fault. He stared into the fire. You would not have been alone if I had handled matters differently years ago. Clara sighed. This argument was not new. It had existed between them for as long as either cared to remember. Before she could answer, a servant entered carrying a silver tray. Several letters rested neatly upon it. The footman approached respectfully. "Additional correspondence, Your Grace." Nathaniel accepted the tray without much thought. Most likely business matters. Estate reports. Political requests. Endless obligations waiting for his attention. He set the letters upon a nearby table. Unopened. Clara noticed immediately. "You have ignored enough responsibilities for 1 week. My responsibilities are here." "No." Her tone grew firmer. "Your responsibilities are everywhere." Nathaniel almost smiled despite himself. Even weakened by illness, Clara remained impossible to intimidate. The physician rose from his chair. "Miss Hastings requires rest." Nathaniel nodded. "Of course." Clara settled deeper into the cushions. "Go home." "Not yet. You are stubborn." "So I have been told." Repeatedly. For the first time that morning, genuine amusement touched Nathaniel's expression. The sight seemed to reassure Clara more than any medicine. After a few moments her eyes drifted closed. The physician quietly adjusted the blanket. Nathaniel stepped away to avoid disturbing her. He moved toward the table holding the newly arrived letters. Only then did he begin sorting through them. Most contained exactly what he expected. Business requests, estate updates, invitations, reports requiring signatures. Nothing urgent. Nothing unusual. He opened one, then another. His attention remained divided. Part of him continued listening for any sound from Clara's corner of the room. The habit had become automatic. Outside, rain tapped steadily against the windows. Carriages rolled through wet streets below. The city carried on unaware of the events unfolding elsewhere. Unaware that a duchess had spent the night in labor nearly 200 miles away. Unaware that a child had been born at sunrise. Unaware that a father remained completely ignorant of both. Nathaniel reached for another envelope, then paused. Something felt strange. The pile seemed unusually small. He frowned slightly. "James." The footman immediately stepped forward. "Your Grace. Is this all of today's correspondence?" "Yes, Your Grace." Nathaniel glanced toward the tray again. "Nothing from Ashbourne?" The servant hesitated. "Not that I have seen, sir." Nathaniel's frown deepened. That was unusual. The estate manager typically sent updates every few days, especially during winter. He set the thought aside. There would be time to investigate later. At least that was what he told himself. The morning continued quietly. Clara slept. The physician departed after leaving additional instructions. Nathaniel reviewed paperwork he could no longer postpone. Yet concentration proved difficult. An odd sense of unease had begun to settle over him. He could not explain it. Nothing specific triggered the feeling. No obvious danger. No alarming news. Merely a persistent sensation that something important remained unresolved. Around noon Clara finally woke again. She appeared stronger than before. Color had begun returning to her cheeks. "You are still here." Nathaniel looked up from his documents. "Unfortunately," she laughed softly. "Your sense of humor grows darker every year." "That suggests I possess one." "Barely." The exchange felt familiar, comfortable, like countless conversations before it. Yet even as Clara spoke, Nathaniel found his attention drifting elsewhere, toward the window, toward the road, toward the unexplained absence of correspondence from Ashbourne. Clara noticed. She always noticed. "What is troubling you?" Nathaniel considered denying it, then abandoned the effort. "Nothing." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That answer has never convinced anyone." He leaned back slightly. "The estate has not written. Perhaps everything is fine. Perhaps." Yet the unease remained. Clara studied him for another moment. Then her expression shifted. Something thoughtful entered her gaze. "When was the last time you spoke with Charlotte?" The question caught him off guard. Nathaniel looked down at the papers before him. He searched for an answer. To his surprise, none arrived immediately. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. Travel, responsibilities, meetings, obligations. Eventually he found the truth. "I do not remember." Clara stared at him. That is not a reassuring answer. Nathaniel remained silent. For reasons he could not fully explain, Guilt stirred unexpectedly beneath his ribs. Clara's voice softened. She is expecting your child. I am aware. Are you? The question lingered between them. Neither spoke. Rain continued striking the windows. Somewhere downstairs a clock chimed the hour. Nathaniel glanced toward the stack of unopened correspondence once more. The feeling returned immediately. Stronger this time. Not fear. Not exactly. More like instinct. The sense that something important had already happened. Something waiting beyond the edge of his awareness. Before he could examine the thought further, a sudden crash echoed from across the room. Nathaniel turned instantly. Clara had attempted to stand. Her face had gone pale. One hand reached for the edge of a nearby table before her knees gave way beneath her. Clara! Nathaniel crossed the room in seconds. He caught her before she struck the floor. Clara's eyes fluttered shut. The color drained completely from her face. Nathaniel lowered her carefully onto the chaise and called for help. Servants rushed forward. Footsteps thundered through the house. The physician was summoned immediately. Once again, every other concern vanished beneath urgent necessity. And far away at Ashbourne Manor, a newborn boy slept peacefully in his mother's arms, while the letter that should have changed everything still had not reached his father. The physician arrived within minutes. By then Clara had regained consciousness, though she appeared exhausted by the effort. Nathaniel remained beside her until the examination concluded. Every answer seemed to bring another question. Every reassurance carried a warning to proceed carefully. The fever had retreated, but recovery would require time. More rest, less stress, constant supervision. By late afternoon, the physician finally departed once again. Clara slept peacefully. The townhouse grew quiet. For the first time in days, there was nothing left for Nathaniel to do. The realization felt strangely unfamiliar. He stood alone in the drawing room and stared out at the rain-streaked windows. The uneasy feeling that had followed him throughout the day returned immediately. Stronger now, harder to ignore. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The door opened. A travel-worn courier stepped inside. Snow clung to his boots and coat. His face looked exhausted from hard riding. Nathaniel recognized the Ashbourne crest on the leather satchel immediately. Every muscle in his body seemed to tighten. Your Grace. The courier bowed. A message from Ashbourne Manor. Nathaniel crossed the room before the man finished speaking. He accepted the sealed envelope and immediately noticed something unusual. The paper was wrinkled, damp around the edges, the seal partially damaged. It looked as though the letter had survived far more than an ordinary journey. When was this sent? Nathaniel asked. The courier hesitated. 3 days ago, Your Grace. 3 days. Nathaniel stared at the envelope. Something cold settled in his chest. 3 days. He broke the seal. The handwriting belonged to Mrs. Whittaker. The first lines struck him like a physical blow. Her Grace entered labor shortly after midnight. The weather prevented immediate communication. Both the physician and midwife have been summoned. Nathaniel read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Labor. Charlotte. Midnight. 3 days ago. His pulse accelerated. He turned the page. The next lines blurred momentarily before coming back into focus. A son has been born. Mother and child survived a difficult delivery. Relief swept through him first. Powerful. Immediate. A son. His son. Alive. Charlotte alive as well. For one brief second, gratitude overwhelmed every other emotion. Then he noticed the date. 3 days ago. 3 entire days had passed. 3 days during which he knew nothing. 3 days during which Charlotte had faced everything alone. Nathaniel lowered the letter slowly. The room seemed strangely silent. Even the rain outside had faded into the background. Your Grace. The courier shifted uncertainly. Nathaniel looked up. Why did this arrive so late? The man swallowed. I do not know, sir. The letter reached a forwarding office in London only this morning. Forwarding office. Another delay. Another unexplained complication. Nathaniel dismissed the courier and remained standing in the center of the room long after the door closed. A son. The words should have filled him with joy. Instead, they collided with something far more complicated. Images began surfacing uninvited. Charlotte waiting at Ashbourne Manor. Charlotte facing labor. Charlotte looking toward the door, expecting him, waiting for him. The image would not leave his mind. Nathaniel folded the letter carefully, then unfolded it again. His gaze returned repeatedly to the same sentence. Mother and child survived a difficult delivery. Difficult. The word suddenly seemed inadequate. Charlotte had nearly carried their child to term during one of the worst winter storms of the year. He should have been there. The realization arrived without excuse, without qualification, without any comfortable justification. He should have been there. A voice interrupted from behind him. Something happened. Nathaniel turned. Clara stood in the doorway. A servant hovered nearby, clearly unhappy that she had left her room. Clara ignored the disapproval entirely. Her gaze settled on the letter in Nathaniel's hand. What is it? For a moment he could not answer. The words felt strangely difficult to speak. My son was born. Clara froze. Then genuine happiness filled her face. Nathaniel. He handed her the letter. She read quickly. Her smile faded almost immediately. Not because of the birth. Because of the date. Clara looked up slowly. Neither needed to say it aloud. Both understood. 3 days. Nathaniel stared toward the window. I did not know. Clara remained silent. No one informed me. Still silence. Nathaniel exhaled heavily. Charlotte was alone. Clara folded the letter and returned it. Her expression softened. Then go home. Nathaniel looked at her. You need rest. And your wife needed you. The words were gentle. That somehow made them worse. Nathaniel said nothing. Clara stepped closer. I am recovering. I have physicians, servants, nurses, an entire household hovering around me every minute of the day. Her eyes held his steadily. Charlotte had none of the one person she actually needed. The truth landed with uncomfortable precision. Nathaniel looked away first. For perhaps the first time in years, he had no defense ready. No practical explanation. No convenient reasoning. Only facts. His wife entered labor. His son was born. He was not there. An hour later preparations were underway. Fresh horses. Travel supplies. A carriage made ready despite worsening road conditions. Nathaniel moved through the process almost mechanically. Servants hurried around him. Instructions were issued. Luggage loaded. Yet his thoughts remained fixed elsewhere. He found himself remembering details he had ignored for years. Charlotte waiting at dinner after he arrived home late. Charlotte standing beside him at social functions while he spoke to everyone except her. Charlotte smiling politely whenever guests asked about their marriage. Small moments. Hundreds of them. Moments he had dismissed because they seemed insignificant. Now they returned one after another. By evening the carriage departed London. Rain gave way to snow as they traveled north. Darkness settled over the countryside. Nathaniel sat alone inside the carriage while the wheels rattled over frozen roads. Sleep remained impossible. Every mile seemed painfully slow. Every delay intolerable. At one point he unfolded Mrs. Whitaker's letter again. Near the bottom of the page he noticed a final line he had overlooked earlier. Her Grace has named the child Benjamin. Nathaniel stared at the name. Benjamin. She had chosen without him. The realization should not have mattered. Yet it did. Not because she lacked the right. Because she had been forced to make every decision alone. Somewhere after midnight the carriage stopped briefly to change horses. Nathaniel stepped outside. Cold air struck his face immediately. Snow stretched across the countryside beneath a moonlit sky. The world looked peaceful. Silent. Vast. He remembered the day Charlotte told him she was expecting a child. Her expression. Her nervous hopefulness. The way she waited for his reaction. He had thought himself calm. Controlled. Appropriate. Only now did he realize how little that response must have meant to her. The memory left an unpleasant weight in his chest. Before dawn the towers of Ashbourne Manor finally appeared in the distance. Relief surged through him. The journey was over. Yet as the carriage rolled closer, another feeling emerged alongside it. Uncertainty. Nathaniel had spent years commanding estates, managing negotiations, and solving problems that intimidated other men. None of those experiences prepared him for what waited beyond those doors. The carriage stopped at the entrance. Servants hurried forward. Nathaniel stepped out before anyone could assist him. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he climbed the front steps. The doors opened. Warm air greeted him. So did silence. Not the ordinary silence of a sleeping household. Something different. Something watchful. Mrs. Whitaker stood waiting in the entrance hall. Relief crossed her face when she saw him. It vanished almost immediately. Your Grace. Nathaniel removed his gloves. How is she? The housekeeper hesitated. The pause lasted only a second. Yet it felt longer. The baby is healthy. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. And Charlotte? Mrs. Whitaker lowered her eyes. Her Grace is recovering. Recovering. Not well. Not resting comfortably. Recovering. Another uncomfortable truth hidden within a careful phrase. Nathaniel looked toward the grand staircase. Suddenly he wanted nothing more than to see her. To explain. To apologize. To say something. Anything. Mrs. Whitaker seemed to read his thoughts. She is awake. Nathaniel immediately started toward the stairs. Then the housekeeper spoke again. Quietly. Respectfully. Yet firmly enough to stop him. Your Grace. He turned. Mrs. Whitaker folded her hands together. Her Grace has not asked for you. The words lingered in the silent hall as Nathaniel stood motionless beneath them. For the first time since receiving the letter, a possibility occurred to him that had never crossed his mind before. Charlotte might no longer be waiting. Nathaniel remained standing in the entrance hall long after Mrs. Whitaker's words faded into silence. Servants moved quietly around him. Coats were taken. Luggage disappeared upstairs. The household continued its routine. Yet everything felt different. Ashbourne Manor had always been a place where he moved with certainty. Every room familiar. Every responsibility clear. For the first time since inheriting the title, he felt like an outsider beneath his own roof. Mrs. Whitaker studied him carefully. Would you like to see the baby, Your Grace? Nathaniel blinked as though the question had pulled him from a distant place. The baby. His son. Benjamin. Yes. The answer came immediately. The housekeeper nodded. This way. They climbed the staircase together. Morning sunlight filtered through tall windows overlooking the snow-covered grounds. The storm had passed completely now. Pale winter light stretched across polished floors and cream-colored walls. Nathaniel found himself looking toward the east wing where Charlotte's chambers were located. The door remained closed. No movement. No sign that she knew he had returned. Mrs. Whitaker led him instead toward the nursery. The room smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. Sunlight pooled across a rocking chair positioned beside the window. Shelves lined one wall. Tiny blankets rested neatly folded nearby. The space felt warm, welcoming, loved. Nathaniel stopped just inside the doorway. A nurse stood near the cradle. She curtsied respectfully before stepping aside. For a moment he simply stared. The infant sleeping beneath the blanket seemed impossibly small. A few dark strands of hair rested against a tiny forehead. One small hand remained curled near his face. The sight struck Nathaniel with unexpected force. Something tightened in his chest. Not pain. Not exactly. Something deeper. More vulnerable. He stepped closer. Slowly. Almost cautiously. This is Benjamin, Mrs. Whitaker said softly. Nathaniel nodded. He could not seem to find words. The baby shifted slightly in his sleep. One tiny fist opened and closed again. Nathaniel had attended parliament sessions, negotiated major business agreements, managed thousands of acres and hundreds of tenants. None of those experiences prepared him for the sight before him. Benjamin looked completely unaware of the title he would someday inherit, unaware of expectations, unaware of mistakes already made on his behalf. He was simply a child. Nathaniel's child. Would you like to hold him? The nurse asked gently. Nathaniel hesitated. The question surprised him. He had not considered it. Yet refusing somehow felt wrong. Yes. The nurse carefully lifted the infant and transferred him into Nathaniel's arms. Immediately uncertainty swept through him. He felt absurdly afraid of making a mistake. Benjamin weighed almost nothing. Warm. Fragile. Real. Nathaniel looked down. The baby's face remained peaceful. For several seconds nothing happened. Then Benjamin stirred. His tiny features tightened. A faint sound escaped him. The nurse smiled reassuringly. That is perfectly normal. Nathaniel nodded. Yet the child seemed increasingly restless. Benjamin's eyes opened briefly. Gray. Very gray. Nathaniel's breath caught. The resemblance was unmistakable. Then the baby began to cry. Softly at first. Then louder. Nathaniel adjusted his hold instinctively. Benjamin cried harder. The nurse stepped forward. Sometimes newborns need familiar voices. Nathaniel looked down again. Benjamin. The crying continued. It is all right. Louder now. The tiny face reddened with distress. Nathaniel felt strangely helpless. The nurse reached for him gently. Allow me, Your Grace. Reluctantly, Nathaniel surrendered the child. The change was immediate. Within moments Benjamin's cries softened. The nurse rocked him carefully. The room settled back into quiet. Nathaniel stared at the cradle. Something about the exchange left an unexpected ache behind. Rationally he understood. The child was only a few days old. He knew nothing of fathers or family. Yet emotion rarely followed logic. Benjamin had calmed for a stranger. Not for him. Mrs. Whitaker watched from nearby. Her expression revealed nothing. That somehow made it worse. Nathaniel turned away and approached the window. Snow sparkled across the grounds outside. The world appeared peaceful. Yet he felt increasingly aware of everything he had missed. The first cry. The first moments. The first time Benjamin opened his eyes. Memories that belonged to everyone except him. The nursery door opened quietly. Emily entered carrying fresh linens. She froze when she saw Nathaniel. Surprise flashed across her face. Then uncertainty. The young maid curtsied quickly. Your Grace. Nathaniel nodded politely. Emily hurried toward the cradle. Her entire expression transformed the moment she looked at Benjamin. Warmth, affection, familiarity. She adjusted his blanket with practiced care. Benjamin immediately relaxed further. Nathaniel noticed. Of course he noticed. Emily had been there. Through the storm. Through the birth. Through every moment he missed. The realization settled heavily between his ribs. After several minutes, Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat gently. Her Grace may be awake now. Nathaniel looked toward the door. Hope stirred despite everything. May I see her? The housekeeper hesitated. Again. Always hesitation when Charlotte became the subject. You may ask. Not yes. Not certainly. Ask. Nathaniel thanked the nurse and left the nursery. The journey across the corridor felt far longer than it should have. Charlotte's door stood partially open. Sunlight streamed through the windows beyond. The room looked peaceful, quiet. He paused briefly before entering. Charlotte sat propped against several pillows. Her hair rested loosely around her shoulders. The exhaustion remained visible. So did the lingering paleness. Yet something else had changed. Nathaniel noticed it immediately. The sadness he remembered had been replaced by calm. Not happiness. Not forgiveness. Calm. She looked up when he entered. Their eyes met. No surprise appeared in her expression. No visible relief. Only acknowledgement. Nathaniel. Hearing his name spoken so simply unsettled him more than anger would have. Charlotte. Silence followed. The distance between them felt larger than the room itself. Nathaniel stepped forward. I came as soon as I learned. Charlotte lowered her gaze briefly. I know. No accusation. No bitterness. Somehow that made every word harder. The messages never reached me. Charlotte nodded once. Mrs. Whitaker explained. Another silence. Nathaniel searched for something meaningful to say. An apology. An explanation. Anything. Yet every sentence sounded inadequate before it left his mouth. Finally he settled on the truth. I should have been here. Charlotte looked toward the window. Snow glimmered beyond the glass. Yes. Just one word. Quiet. Gentle. Final. Nathaniel felt it more deeply than any argument. He moved closer. How are you feeling? Tired. The physician said the delivery was difficult. Charlotte remained silent for a moment. It is over now. Again the conversation ended where he expected it to continue. She offered no details. No emotion. No invitation. Nathaniel realized with growing discomfort that she no longer seemed interested in being understood. For years she had tried. He could see that now. The conversations he rushed through. The concerns he dismissed. The hopes she shared while waiting for responses that never came. Eventually, even the most patient heart stopped asking. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Emily entered carrying a tray. Tea. Fresh bread. A small bowl of broth. She paused upon seeing Nathaniel. "I apologize, Your Grace." Charlotte immediately smiled. A real smile. Small but genuine. "Do not apologize, Emily." The maid relaxed visibly. She arranged the tray beside the bed and quietly asked whether Charlotte needed anything else. The exchange lasted less than a minute. Yet Nathaniel noticed something that unsettled him. Charlotte's voice sounded warmer speaking to her maid than it had speaking to her husband. Emily departed moments later. Silence returned. Nathaniel looked down at his gloves resting in his hands. "I met Benjamin." Something flickered briefly across Charlotte's face. Not quite a smile. Not quite sadness. And he hesitated. He did not seem impressed. To his surprise, a faint laugh escaped her. The sound lasted only a moment, yet it transformed the room. Nathaniel felt his chest tighten unexpectedly. He could not remember the last time he heard her laugh. Charlotte looked down at her hands. "He is still deciding what he thinks of the world." Nathaniel almost smiled. Then he remembered the nursery, the crying, the nurse taking Benjamin back, the immediate comfort that followed. "I do not believe he thought much of me." Charlotte's gaze lifted toward him. For the first time that morning, something resembling honesty appeared between them. "He does not know you." The words were not cruel. They did not need to be, because they were true. Nathaniel stood motionless as the meaning settled fully into place. Benjamin did not know him. Charlotte barely seemed to know him anymore. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Blackwood found himself facing a problem that power, wealth, and authority could not immediately solve. For the next several days, Ashbourne Manor settled into a strange new rhythm. Snow continued melting across the grounds. Icicles disappeared from the rooflines. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. Nathaniel noticed it everywhere. He noticed it during breakfast when Charlotte no longer waited for him to join her. He noticed it in the evenings when she remained in the nursery rather than the drawing room. Most of all, he noticed it in the quiet certainty with which she moved through her days. She no longer seemed to expect anything from him. The realization followed him constantly. It sat beside him during estate meetings. It lingered in the corners of every conversation. It greeted him each morning and followed him into sleep each night. On the 5th day after his return, Nathaniel entered the library shortly after sunrise. He intended to review correspondence that had accumulated during his absence. Instead, he found Mrs. Whittaker standing beside the fireplace with a stack of papers in her hands. The housekeeper looked unusually serious. Nathaniel immediately recognized the expression. Something was wrong. "What is it?" Mrs. Whittaker hesitated. Then she extended several folded letters toward him. "I believe these belong to you, Your Grace." Nathaniel accepted them. The paper appeared worn. Some envelopes carried water stains. Others looked older. Much older. He glanced at the handwriting and immediately froze. Charlotte. Every letter had been written by Charlotte. Nathaniel looked up sharply. "Where did you find these?" Mrs. Whittaker folded her hands together. "In the West Wing storage rooms." Nathaniel frowned. "Why would Charlotte's letters be in storage?" "That is precisely why I brought them to you." Silence settled between them. Nathaniel opened the first envelope. The letter inside was dated nearly 3 years earlier. He stared at the date. 3 years. Slowly he began reading. The words were simple. Charlotte described the first spring flowers appearing in the eastern gardens. She mentioned a tenant family welcoming a new child. She asked whether his journey to Edinburgh had gone well. There was warmth in every line. Thoughtfulness. Affection. Nathaniel reached the end and turned the page over. Nothing. No response. No indication he had ever received it. He opened another. Then another. The dates stretched across years. Dozens of letters. Perhaps more. Every one addressed to him. Every one unopened. A cold sensation crept through his chest. "I never saw these." Mrs. Whittaker nodded slowly. I suspected as much. Nathaniel looked up. How many are there? These are only the ones we found. Nathaniel stared at the stack. His mind struggled to process what lay before him. Charlotte had written repeatedly, for years, while he traveled, while he worked, while he convinced himself she had little interest in correspondence. All this time she had been writing. The letters simply never reached him. He opened another. This one described her excitement after selecting furniture for the nursery. Another mentioned a harvest festival in the village. One contained a pressed flower carefully preserved between pages. Nathaniel remembered none of it, because he had never seen any of it. The realization left him strangely unsettled. He had spent years believing distance grew naturally between them, that their marriage simply lacked the intimacy other couples shared. Yet now evidence sat in his hands proving Charlotte had tried. Repeatedly, consistently, for years. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Emily appeared in the doorway carrying fresh linens. She stopped when she noticed the letters. Her face immediately changed. Nathaniel noticed. You have seen these before. Emily looked alarmed. Your Grace, I... Answer honestly. The maid lowered her gaze. Yes. Nathaniel felt something tighten inside him. Explain. Emily hesitated visibly. Loyalty battled fear across her expression. Finally she took a breath. Her Grace wrote constantly. Nathaniel remained silent. Especially during the early years. Emily's voice softened. She always waited for replies. Another pause. Most never came. Nathaniel looked down at the letters again. Because I never received them. Emily blinked. Confusion crossed her face. Genuine confusion. You did not. No. The maid stared at him. For several seconds she appeared unable to speak. Then realization slowly dawned. Oh! The single word carried years of misunderstanding within it. Nathaniel set the letters carefully upon the desk. Who handled household correspondence? Emily immediately looked uncomfortable. I do not know. Nathaniel studied her expression. She knew more than she wanted to say. He could see it. Emily. The young woman swallowed nervously. Lady Victoria often reviewed outgoing mail when she visited. Nathaniel froze. His mother. Emily seemed to realize what she had revealed and quickly lowered her eyes. I should not have said anything. Nathaniel barely heard her. His thoughts had already shifted elsewhere. Lady Victoria Blackwood visited Ashbourne frequently during the early years of his marriage. Far more frequently than Charlotte preferred. The two women had always maintained polite relations. Yet Nathaniel remembered small tensions. Sharp comments disguised as advice. Criticism hidden inside compliments. At the time he dismissed it as ordinary family friction. Now uncertainty crept into those memories. Emily excused herself moments later. Nathaniel remained alone with the letters. He spent hours reading them. One after another. A portrait of Charlotte slowly emerged from the pages. Not the composed Duchess society knew. Not the calm woman he saw now. Someone else. Someone hopeful. Someone eager to share her life with him. Someone who noticed small details and wanted him to notice them too. One letter struck him particularly hard. It had been written shortly after their second wedding anniversary. Nathaniel recognized the date immediately because he had forgotten it entirely that year. Charlotte had not mentioned the oversight. She never complained. Yet here, in private words never intended for anyone else, the truth appeared. I know you are busy. I know the estate requires much of your attention. Sometimes I simply wish you missed me as much as I miss you. Nathaniel read the sentence 3 times. Then a fourth. He remembered exactly where he had been that week. London. Negotiating a business arrangement he could barely recall now. Meanwhile Charlotte sat alone writing words he never received. The weight of it became increasingly difficult to ignore. As afternoon approached, Nathaniel carried the letters to his study. He intended to organize them. Instead, another discovery awaited him. While sorting the stack, a smaller folded note slipped free from one of the envelopes. Unlike the others, it was not addressed to him. The handwriting belonged to Mrs. Whittaker. The message was brief. Urgent. Your Grace must return immediately. The Duchess has gone into labor. Nathaniel stared at the note. His pulse quickened. This was one of the missing messages. One of the letters that should have reached him during Charlotte's labor. Yet it never had. The note carried no water damage. No sign of weather delays. Nothing. It had simply vanished. Somehow it ended up hidden among years of missing correspondence. Nathaniel slowly lowered the paper. The implications unfolded piece by piece. Charlotte's letters disappeared. His messages disappeared. Important correspondence vanished without explanation. Not once. Repeatedly. For years. This was no accident. Someone had been interfering. Someone inside the household. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Mrs. Whitaker entered. One glance at Nathaniel's expression told her everything. "You found something else." Nathaniel held up the labor notice. The housekeeper closed her eyes briefly. "I was afraid of that. How many messages went missing?" Mrs. Whitaker looked exhausted suddenly. Older than her years. "I do not know." Nathaniel rose from his chair. "Someone deliberately prevented communication between Charlotte and me." "Yes." The answer came quietly, without hesitation. Nathaniel stared at her. "And you suspected this?" Mrs. Whitaker nodded once. For some time, silence filled the room. Nathaniel felt anger beginning to stir. Not explosive anger. Something colder. More dangerous. "Why did no one tell me?" Mrs. Whitaker's eyes met his steadily. "Because no one believed you would listen." The words landed harder than she intended. Or perhaps exactly as intended. Nathaniel looked away first. Deep down, he knew she was right. Years ago, he would have dismissed concerns as misunderstandings. Excuses. Household drama. He had trusted systems. Procedures. Assumptions. He had not paid attention to Charlotte. Not closely enough. Not often enough. The consequences now surrounded him in the form of missing years. Missing conversations. Missing memories. Missing chances. As evening settled across Ashbourne Manor, Nathaniel stood alone in his study, surrounded by letters he should have received long ago. The fire crackled softly beside him. Outside, twilight darkened the snow-covered grounds. Upstairs, Charlotte sat with their son, completely unaware of what had been discovered. Nathaniel picked up one final letter and unfolded it carefully. The date made his chest tighten. It had been written only 2 weeks before Benjamin's birth. The final line stopped him cold. "I hope our child knows you better than I do." Nathaniel stared at the sentence until the words blurred. Then, for the first time, he began to understand that the greatest loss was not missing the birth itself. The greatest loss was everything that had been disappearing long before that night ever arrived. The next morning arrived wrapped in silver sunlight and uneasy silence. Nathaniel slept very little. Long after midnight, he remained seated in his study, surrounded by Charlotte's letters. Some lay open across the desk. Others rested in neat stacks beside the fire. Every page seemed to reveal another piece of a life he had never truly seen. He finally left the study shortly before dawn and walked through the quiet manor alone. The household still slept. Only a few servants moved through the corridors, preparing for the day ahead. Eventually his steps carried him toward the nursery. Light glowed beneath the door. Someone was already awake. Nathaniel entered quietly. Charlotte sat in the rocking chair beside the window. Benjamin rested peacefully in her arms. The morning sun painted both of them in soft gold. For a moment Nathaniel simply watched. Neither noticed him immediately. Charlotte's attention remained entirely on their son. She spoke softly to him. Not words meant for anyone else to hear. Just gentle observations. Small reassurances. Tiny fragments of affection. Nathaniel realized he had never seen her look so completely at peace. The sight stirred something unexpectedly painful inside him, because he was witnessing a world that no longer seemed to require his presence. Charlotte finally looked up. Her expression shifted slightly when she saw him standing there. Not surprise, not discomfort, simply acknowledgement. "You are awake early." Nathaniel stepped further into the room. "I could not sleep." Charlotte nodded once. She appeared unsurprised by that answer. Silence settled between them. Benjamin shifted slightly against her shoulder but remained asleep. Nathaniel looked at his son, then back at Charlotte. "May I sit?" "Of course." The invitation felt polite, formal, much like speaking to an acquaintance rather than a wife. Nathaniel took the chair opposite hers. For several moments neither spoke. The nursery remained peaceful. The crackling fire, the faint ticking of a clock, the occasional rustle of blankets. Finally Nathaniel broke the silence. "I found your letters." Charlotte's eyes lifted immediately. Something flickered across her face, then vanished. "Which letters?" "All of them." The room became very still. Charlotte looked away first. Her gaze settled on Benjamin's sleeping face. "I see." Nathaniel studied her carefully. "You knew they never reached me." Charlotte was quiet for several seconds. "Eventually." The answer unsettled him. "Eventually?" A faint smile touched her lips. Not a happy smile. More like acceptance. "At first I thought you were busy." She adjusted Benjamin's blanket gently. "Then I thought perhaps you simply disliked writing." Nathaniel felt a knot forming in his chest. Charlotte continued softly. "After a while, I stopped wondering." Every sentence landed with uncomfortable precision. Because none of it sounded angry. It sounded tired. Nathaniel looked toward the window. Snow reflected sunlight across the room. "Someone interfered with our correspondence." Charlotte nodded. "Apparently. That does not concern you?" Her eyes met his. Calm. Steady. "It should have years ago." Nathaniel had no answer for that. The truth sat plainly between them. If he had paid attention sooner, perhaps the missing letters would have mattered sooner. Charlotte looked down at Benjamin again. The conversation appeared finished from her perspective. Yet Nathaniel found himself unwilling to let it end. "Not this time." "Charlotte." She looked up. "I owe you an explanation." Something changed in her expression then. Not hope. Not anticipation. The opposite. A quiet reluctance. As though explanations had arrived too late to matter. "About London?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded. Charlotte remained silent. He took a breath. "Clara Hastings is not who society believes she is." A long pause followed. Benjamin stirred softly. Charlotte gently soothed him. "I never asked who society believes she is." Nathaniel blinked. The response caught him off guard. Because it was true. She had never questioned him. Never demanded answers. Never confronted him about rumors. The realization made everything harder. "You should know the truth." Charlotte's gaze remained fixed on Benjamin. "Then tell me." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. For years he had spoken very little about Clara. Not because of scandal. Because the subject remained deeply personal. Yet now secrecy no longer served anyone. "Clara is my sister." Charlotte froze. Not dramatically. Not visibly at first. Only the smallest tightening of her fingers around Benjamin revealed her surprise. Nathaniel continued quietly. "Half-sister." The nursery fell silent. Even the clock seemed louder suddenly. Charlotte looked at him carefully. Truly looked at him for the first time in days. "Your sister." Nathaniel nodded. "My father had a relationship before he married my mother." Charlotte absorbed the information without interruption. Nathaniel stared into the fire. Memories he rarely revisited surfaced once more. "Clara's mother died when she was young. My father provided financial support but little else." His voice grew quieter. "After his death, responsibility became mine." Charlotte listened without speaking. Nathaniel continued. "Most of society does not know she exists. Because of the scandal." "Yes." Charlotte lowered her eyes. Understanding slowly appeared. Pieces connecting. Assumptions dissolving. "And she became ill." Nathaniel nodded. "Very suddenly." Another silence followed. Yet this one felt different. Less hostile. More thoughtful. Charlotte looked down at Benjamin once more. "You stayed because you were afraid she might die." The words were simple. Nathaniel appreciated that. No accusation hidden inside them. No attempt to exaggerate. Just truth. "Yes." Charlotte sat quietly for several moments. Benjamin opened his eyes briefly before drifting back to sleep. Nathaniel watched mother and son together. Then Charlotte finally spoke. "I am sorry she was ill." The response stunned him. Not because it was unexpected. Because it reflected exactly who Charlotte had always been. Compassionate even when hurt. Kind even when disappointed. Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Thank you." Another pause followed. Then Charlotte asked the question he feared most. "Did you know I was in labor?" Nathaniel met her eyes immediately. "No." She searched his face, looking for doubt, looking for uncertainty. Finding neither, Nathaniel held her gaze steadily. "I swear to you, Charlotte, I did not know." The nursery remained silent. A full minute passed, perhaps longer. Finally Charlotte nodded once. She believed him. Nathaniel saw it. The realization brought relief. Yet the relief lasted only seconds. Because belief changed very little. He had not chosen another woman over his wife. That much was now clear. Yet Charlotte still endured labor alone. Benjamin was still born without his father present. The pain remained. The absence remained. The consequences remained. Charlotte seemed to understand this as well. "Then someone made certain you never learned." Nathaniel nodded. "Yes." Her gaze drifted toward the window. Snow sparkled across the grounds. "That explains many things." Nathaniel felt hope stir cautiously. "Does it?" Charlotte considered the question. "It explains why you were not there." She looked back at him, calm as ever. "It does not explain the years before that." The words settled heavily between them. Nathaniel looked away first, because there was no defense. No missing letter could account for every disappointment. No hidden interference could erase every moment he failed to notice her loneliness. Charlotte shifted Benjamin carefully in her arms. The baby yawned and stretched one tiny hand upward. Immediately her attention softened. Her entire expression changed. Nathaniel watched the transformation quietly. It occurred to him then that Benjamin had already become the center of her world. Not because she wanted to exclude anyone, because children required certainty, presence, dependability, things she could provide herself. The realization left him unexpectedly afraid. Not of losing Charlotte completely. That fear had existed for days. This was different. A new fear. The possibility that Benjamin might grow up knowing him only as a distant figure who occasionally appeared and disappeared. A title. Provider. A stranger. The very thing Charlotte's final letter had warned him about. Nathaniel rose slowly from his chair. "There is more to uncover." Charlotte nodded. "I know. I will find the truth." Her expression remained unreadable. "I hope you do." Nathaniel moved toward the door, then paused. Something compelled him to look back. Charlotte sat exactly where he left her. Sunlight surrounding her. Benjamin sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. For the first time since returning home, Nathaniel understood something important. Learning the truth about Clara might clear his name. It might explain one terrible night. But redemption would require something far more difficult. It would require confronting every silence that came before it. And Charlotte, despite finally knowing the truth, was no longer waiting for him to begin. Winter slowly loosened its grip on Ashbourne Manor. Weeks passed. Snow retreated from the fields. The first signs of spring appeared along garden paths and beneath hedgerows. Life continued forward with quiet determination. Benjamin grew stronger each day. His cries became louder, his eyes more alert. His tiny hands seemed constantly in motion. Every servant in the manor adored him. Every room felt brighter whenever he appeared. Everyone, it seemed, had found a place in Benjamin's world. Everyone except Nathaniel. The realization arrived gradually, then all at once. At first he convinced himself it was simply a matter of time. Newborns recognized familiar voices, familiar scents, familiar routines. Naturally Benjamin preferred those who had surrounded him since birth. Charlotte, Emily, Mrs. Whitaker, the nurse. It was reasonable, temporary. Yet the weeks continued passing. The distance remained. One afternoon Nathaniel entered the nursery carrying a carved wooden horse purchased during a business trip years earlier. He had kept it tucked away in storage, waiting for a future child. The toy felt strangely significant now. Promise delayed. A connection he hoped to build. Benjamin sat on a blanket spread across the floor. Charlotte rested nearby with a book in her lap. The moment Nathaniel entered, Benjamin's attention shifted briefly toward him. Hope flickered inside Nathaniel. Then the baby immediately turned toward Charlotte instead, reaching for her, smiling at her. Nathaniel stopped walking. Charlotte noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything involving Benjamin. "He is teething," she explained gently. "He has been fussy all morning." Nathaniel nodded. The explanation helped very little. He knelt beside the blanket and carefully offered the wooden horse. Benjamin stared at it, then reached for Charlotte's sleeve instead. Charlotte picked him up automatically. The baby immediately settled against her shoulder. Calm. Content. Safe. Nathaniel looked down at the toy still resting in his hand. Something about the moment felt absurdly painful. Not because Benjamin rejected him intentionally. Because the child had no reason not to. Benjamin simply followed familiarity, comfort, trust. Nathaniel had not been present long enough to become any of those things. Charlotte watched him quietly. After a moment she spoke. "You can hold him if you like." Nathaniel looked up. For a brief second he considered declining. Pride urged him to refuse. Common sense prevailed. "Thank you." Charlotte carefully transferred Benjamin into his arms. The baby immediately grew still. Nathaniel felt a surge of cautious optimism. Perhaps things were improving. Perhaps he had imagined the distance. Then Benjamin's lower lip trembled. A tiny sound escaped him. 1 second later the crying began. Loud. Immediate. Heartbroken. Nathaniel adjusted his hold. "Benjamin." The crying intensified. Charlotte reached forward instinctively. The baby stretched both hands toward her. The sight struck Nathaniel harder than he expected. Not because Benjamin wanted his mother. Every child should want his mother. Because the certainty of that desire contrasted so sharply with everything Benjamin felt toward him. Charlotte hesitated before taking the baby back. She seemed reluctant to make the situation worse. Yet Benjamin's distress left little choice. The moment she gathered him into her arms, the crying softened. Within seconds it disappeared entirely. Nathaniel looked away, toward the window, toward the gardens, toward anything except the painful simplicity of what had just happened. "It will change," Charlotte said softly. Nathaniel nodded, yet neither sounded convinced. Later that evening Nathaniel found himself alone in his study. Benjamin's reaction lingered stubbornly in his thoughts. He told himself he was being unreasonable. The child was only weeks old. Expectations were unfair. Irrational, yet disappointment ignored logic entirely. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Enter." Mrs. Whitaker stepped inside carrying a tray of tea. Nathaniel noticed her expression immediately. Thoughtful, concerned, the look of someone debating whether to speak. "Something is on your mind." The housekeeper smiled faintly. "You have become more observant lately, Your Grace." Nathaniel almost laughed. The irony was impossible to miss. "What is it?" Mrs. Whitaker set the tray down carefully. "May I speak honestly? Please." She folded her hands together. "You remind me of Charlotte." Nathaniel frowned. "In what way?" The housekeeper considered her answer carefully. "You are both mourning things that never truly existed." Silence followed. Nathaniel stared at her. "Explain." Mrs. Whitaker looked toward the fire. Her Grace spent years waiting for a husband she believed would eventually notice her. Nathaniel felt the familiar sting of guilt. The housekeeper continued. "You are waiting for a son who already knows you." The meaning unfolded slowly. Then all at once, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. "He does not know me." "Exactly." Mrs. Whitaker's voice remained gentle. "Yet you seem to expect him to." The truth settled heavily between them. Nathaniel said nothing, because once again she was right. He wanted immediate affection, immediate trust, immediate recognition, things Charlotte had waited years to receive from him. The realization left him unexpectedly ashamed. Mrs. Whitaker departed soon afterward. Nathaniel remained in the study long after the fire burned low. Her words refused to leave him. The following days brought little improvement. Benjamin continued growing, laughing, exploring, developing preferences. Nathaniel made deliberate efforts to spend time with him. Sometimes the attempts went reasonably well. Other times they ended exactly as before. One morning Nathaniel volunteered to accompany Charlotte during a walk through the gardens. Spring sunshine warmed the estate for the first time in months. Birds filled the air with song. Benjamin rested comfortably inside a small carriage while Charlotte pushed it along the gravel path. Nathaniel walked beside them. For nearly 20 minutes everything felt surprisingly normal. Peaceful. Then a tenant family approached from across the lawn. The parents greeted the Duke respectfully. Their young daughter, perhaps 5 years old, ran immediately toward Benjamin's carriage. Charlotte smiled. The child smiled back. Within moments conversation flowed easily. Laughter followed. Nathaniel found himself standing slightly apart from the exchange. Watching. Observing. Feeling strangely disconnected. The sensation felt familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. Suddenly he remembered Charlotte standing alone at social gatherings. Watching conversations happen around her. Waiting to be included. Waiting to be noticed. The memory struck with uncomfortable force. How many times had she felt exactly this? Present but unseen. Nearby but somehow separate. Nathaniel barely heard the rest of the conversation. That evening another memory surfaced. Then another. Then another. Charlotte seated alone during dinner while he reviewed documents. Charlotte attending charity functions without him. Charlotte greeting guests while he disappeared into business meetings. Charlotte waiting. Always waiting. The pattern became impossible to ignore. One rainy afternoon Nathaniel entered the music room unexpectedly and stopped in the doorway. Charlotte sat at the piano. Benjamin rested in a basket nearby. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows. Charlotte played softly. Not for an audience. Not even for herself. Simply because Benjamin seemed to enjoy it. The baby kicked his feet happily at every familiar melody. Nathaniel remained unseen for several moments. Watching. Listening. Then Charlotte noticed him. Her fingers stilled. The music ended. The room immediately felt different. Formal again. Guarded. Nathaniel hated that feeling. Hated the realization that his presence altered the atmosphere instead of contributing to it. "Please continue," he said. Charlotte looked surprised. "You were listening?" Nathaniel nodded. "It was beautiful." For a moment genuine uncertainty crossed her face. As though she did not know what to do with the compliment. Then she looked away. "Thank you." The exchange lasted only seconds. Yet it lingered in Nathaniel's thoughts long afterward. Because he suddenly realized how rarely he had offered simple appreciation. Not grand gestures. Not expensive gifts. Just acknowledgement. Recognition. Proof that he saw her. The weeks became months. Benjamin reached an age where his personality emerged more clearly. Curious. Determined. Easily amused. Deeply attached to those he trusted. One afternoon Nathaniel found him in the library with Emily. Benjamin laughed uncontrollably while the maid played a simple game involving a handkerchief and a chair. The sound filled the room. Bright. Joyful. Unrestrained. Nathaniel stopped to watch. Emily noticed him and stepped aside respectfully. "Would you like to try, Your Grace?" Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded. Emily demonstrated the game once more before excusing herself. Nathaniel crouched beside Benjamin. The baby stared at him with serious gray eyes. So much like his own. Nathaniel lifted the handkerchief, hid behind it briefly, then lowered it again. "There you are." Benjamin blinked. Once, twice, then smiled. Not a polite smile. Not accidental. A real smile. Small but unmistakable. Nathaniel felt something shift inside him. Hope. Fragile. Tentative. Yet real. Then Benjamin looked past him toward the doorway. Charlotte had entered unnoticed. Immediately the baby's smile widened. His arms stretched toward her. Nathaniel watched the transformation. The excitement. The trust. The certainty. Charlotte crossed the room and picked him up. Benjamin rested his head against her shoulder with complete confidence. Nathaniel stood slowly. The old disappointment threatened to return. This time he recognized it for what it was. Not rejection. Consequence. Relationships required time. Presence. Patience. Things he had spent years withholding from Charlotte. Things he would now need to earn from his son. And perhaps, if he was fortunate, from his wife as well. By early summer, whispers had begun spreading through London. At first they appeared only in drawing rooms and private dinners. Small observations exchanged between aristocratic ladies behind carefully arranged fans. Quiet questions posed by gentlemen who claimed not to enjoy gossip while eagerly collecting every detail. Then the whispers grew louder, more persistent, harder to contain. Ashbourne Manor remained largely insulated from society's endless speculation, but news always traveled eventually. One afternoon Nathaniel returned from a meeting in London carrying more than business documents. He carried rumors, dangerous ones. The carriage rolled through the estate gates just before sunset. Golden light stretched across the grounds. Workers finished their tasks in the fields. Birds filled the air with evening song. Everything appeared peaceful. Nathaniel wished he could say the same about his thoughts. The moment he entered the manor, he sought out Charlotte. He found her in the conservatory. Benjamin sat upon a blanket near a collection of flowering plants while Charlotte trimmed wilted blossoms from a rosebush. The sight momentarily eased the tension he carried. Then reality returned. Charlotte looked up when he entered. "You are home earlier than expected." Nathaniel nodded. "I need to speak with you." Something in his tone immediately caught her attention. She set down the gardening shears. "What happened?" Nathaniel glanced toward Benjamin. Their son had become fascinated by a fallen leaf and appeared unlikely to concern himself with adult conversation. Still, Nathaniel lowered his voice. "London is talking." Charlotte's expression remained calm. "London is always talking. This is different." A brief silence followed. Then Charlotte understood. Not the details. The subject. Her gaze settled steadily upon him. "About Clara." Nathaniel nodded. The conservatory suddenly felt smaller, warmer, more confined. Charlotte returned her attention to the rosebush. "I suspected that would happen eventually." Nathaniel stared at her. "That is all you have to say?" Charlotte clipped another wilted bloom. "What would you like me to say?" The question frustrated him more than it should have. Not because she was wrong, because she remained so composed, so impossible to provoke. "People believe I neglected my wife during childbirth to remain with another woman." Charlotte finally looked at him again. Her expression remained unreadable. "Did you expect them to assume something else?" Nathaniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, because she was right. From the outside, the situation appeared damning. A duke absent, a duchess alone, another woman in London. Society rarely waited for complete facts. Charlotte rose from her chair and dusted soil from her gloves. "Rumors fade." Nathaniel shook his head. "These are not fading." She studied him carefully. "Then there is more." He exhaled slowly. "Several newspapers have begun repeating the story." Charlotte went still. That changed things. Newspapers transformed gossip into public narrative. Private misunderstandings became permanent records. Reputations suffered. Families suffered. Children eventually suffered. Benjamin deserved better. Nathaniel knew it. Charlotte knew it too. Yet her response surprised him. "And what do the newspapers say?" Nathaniel reached into his coat and produced a folded clipping. Charlotte accepted it. Her eyes moved across the printed lines. She read quietly. The article never mentioned Clara by name. Yet the implication remained obvious. Powerful nobleman. A neglected wife. A lonely childbirth. Questions regarding loyalty. Questions regarding priorities. Questions regarding character. Charlotte finished reading and handed the paper back. Her face revealed very little. "Most of it is technically true." Nathaniel stared at her. "Charlotte." She lifted one shoulder slightly. "You were absent." The truth landed heavily once again. No matter how many explanations emerged, no matter how many secrets were uncovered, certain facts remained unchanged. Nathaniel folded the clipping carefully. "I am trying to correct the situation." Charlotte's gaze softened slightly, not with affection, with understanding. "I know." Benjamin suddenly laughed from across the room. Both parents looked toward him automatically. Their son had discovered that dropping leaves from above his head produced endless entertainment. Nathaniel watched him for a moment, then looked back at Charlotte. "This affects you." Charlotte considered the statement. It always did. The answer lingered between them. Later that evening Nathaniel retreated to his study. Several additional newspaper clippings awaited him there. Reports, speculation, commentary disguised as concern. He read every one. The pattern quickly became obvious. Society had chosen a story. Facts mattered less than emotion. And the emotional version was devastating. A lonely duchess. An absent husband. A mysterious woman. The narrative practically wrote itself. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Mrs. Whitaker entered carrying a tray. Tea, biscuits, concern. Nathaniel had become accustomed to all three. "You have heard?" he asked. The housekeeper nodded. "Everyone has." Nathaniel rubbed his forehead. "Wonderful." Mrs. Whitaker set the tray down carefully. "People enjoy simple explanations. This situation is not simple." "No." Her expression darkened. "Which is precisely why they have simplified it." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. Exhaustion settled heavily upon him. Not physical exhaustion. Something deeper. Months of regret. Months of reflection. Months spent recognizing mistakes he could not undo. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated before speaking again. "There is something else." Nathaniel immediately looked up. The housekeeper rarely hesitated without reason. "What?" "A visitor arrived this afternoon." Nathaniel frowned. "Who?" Mrs. Whitaker's expression tightened. "Lady Victoria." Silence filled the room. Nathaniel sat very still. His mother rarely visited without warning, especially in recent years. The timing felt suspicious, almost calculated. "Where is she?" "The Blue Guest Suite." Nathaniel nodded slowly. His thoughts immediately returned to the missing letters, the hidden correspondence, the labor notice discovered among old papers, questions that still lacked answers, questions that increasingly pointed toward a single possibility. Mrs. Whitaker seemed to read his thoughts. "She requested breakfast with you tomorrow." Nathaniel looked toward the darkening window. Twilight settled across the estate. Shadows stretched across the gardens. Somewhere upstairs Benjamin would soon be preparing for sleep. Charlotte would read to him, sing softly, continue building a life that no longer revolved around waiting for anyone. Meanwhile, another piece of the puzzle had just arrived beneath his roof. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Nathaniel entered the breakfast room precisely on time. Lady Victoria Blackwood already sat at the table, elegant as always, impeccably dressed, completely composed. Age had done little to diminish her commanding presence. She looked up as her son entered. "Nathaniel." "Mother." Formal greetings followed. Tea was poured. Servants withdrew. Silence settled. Nathaniel wasted little time. "You arrived unexpectedly." Lady Victoria smiled faintly. "Must there always be a reason?" "In your case." The smile widened slightly. "Perhaps." Nathaniel studied her carefully. She appeared relaxed. Too relaxed. As though arriving in the middle of a growing scandal required no explanation whatsoever. Finally she folded her napkin and looked directly at him. "The newspapers are becoming tiresome." Nathaniel felt immediate tension. "You have been reading them." "Naturally." Her tone remained casual. "Society loves a tragedy." Nathaniel stared at her. "This is not a tragedy." Lady Victoria tilted her head slightly. "A wife abandoned during childbirth might disagree." The words landed like ice water. Nathaniel's expression hardened immediately. His mother's gaze never wavered. "You know the truth." "Do I?" Nathaniel leaned forward. "You know exactly where I was." Something changed then. Very subtle. A flicker behind her eyes. Gone almost instantly. Yet Nathaniel saw it. "I know only what you told people." Her answer arrived too quickly, too carefully. For the first time, genuine suspicion rose within him. Not vague uncertainty. Not uncomfortable possibility. Suspicion. Lady Victoria lifted her teacup gracefully. "The real question is why your wife spent so many years feeling alone before that night ever occurred." Nathaniel froze. Because the observation struck too close to truths he had spent months confronting. Lady Victoria noticed. Of course she did. She had always excelled at identifying weaknesses. Perhaps society is not entirely mistaken. Nathaniel looked at his mother across the breakfast table. Really looked at her. The woman who raised him. The woman who shaped his understanding of duty, of reputation, of control. Suddenly another realization emerged. Someone had benefited from distance between him and Charlotte. Someone who consistently criticized his wife while encouraging emotional separation. Someone with access to correspondence. Someone powerful enough that servants rarely questioned instructions. The thought settled heavily into place. Lady Victoria continued sipping her tea, completely unaware that the ground beneath her carefully maintained image had begun to crack. And for the first time, Nathaniel found himself wondering not whether his mother knew about the missing letters, but how much she had known all along. The rest of breakfast passed beneath a layer of polite formality so thin it might have shattered at any moment. Lady Victoria spoke about social events, about political appointments, about acquaintances Nathaniel barely remembered. He responded when required. Nothing more. Yet beneath every word, suspicion continued growing. By the time he left the breakfast room, certainty had not arrived. But doubt had taken root, and doubt, once planted, rarely disappeared. That afternoon Nathaniel returned to the study carrying another stack of Charlotte's letters. He had read them all before, yet something compelled him to begin again. This time he approached them differently, not as a husband searching for memories, as an investigator searching for patterns. He spread the correspondence across the desk. Dates, locations, missing intervals, repeated delays. Slowly, connections emerged. Several letters vanished during periods when Lady Victoria stayed at Ashbourne Manor. Others disappeared shortly after visits from her household staff. The pattern was not absolute, but it appeared too often to ignore. Nathaniel stared at the evidence for nearly an hour. Then another realization surfaced. Charlotte's letters were only half the story. What about his? He crossed the room toward a cabinet containing old travel journals. Over the years he had developed a habit of recording itineraries and business notes. Dry, practical, organized. The journals rarely contained personal thoughts, yet they documented dates with meticulous precision. Nathaniel spent the remainder of the afternoon comparing entries. The results left him unsettled. Multiple occasions existed where he clearly remembered writing Charlotte. Several letters referenced in his journals never appeared among the correspondence she received. Entire exchanges had vanished before reaching their destination. The distance between husband and wife had not happened naturally. Someone had helped create it. Evening settled over the estate. Lamps glowed throughout the manor. Servants moved quietly through the halls. Yet Nathaniel remained in the study long after darkness arrived. Finally, he opened the last remaining box Mrs. Whittaker had discovered in storage. Inside rested miscellaneous household records. Receipts, inventories, invitations, nothing remarkable, until he reached the bottom. There, tucked beneath a stack of outdated account books, lay a leather-bound notebook. Nathaniel frowned. He had never seen it before. The cover contained no title, no name, only worn brown leather darkened by age. He opened it. His breath caught almost immediately. Charlotte's handwriting filled the first page. Not correspondence. Not household notes. A journal. Nathaniel lowered himself slowly into the chair. For several seconds, he simply stared at the pages. Reading a private journal felt invasive. Wrong. Yet the notebook had been hidden. Forgotten. Abandoned among storage records. Something told him it contained answers. With growing unease, he began reading. The earliest entries dated back nearly 4 years. At first, the contents seemed ordinary. Reflections on estate life, notes about village events, observations about weather and travel. Then deeper emotions began appearing. Loneliness, disappointment, hope. Nathaniel turned page after page. Every sentence tightened something inside his chest. Charlotte never sounded bitter. That somehow made the entries harder to read. She consistently searched for reasons to excuse him, reasons to understand him, reasons to believe things would improve. One entry described waiting through an entire anniversary dinner alone. Another recounted preparing for a social gathering only to attend by herself because Nathaniel's business meeting ran late. Again, and again, and again. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly. Memories surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. He remembered those days. Yet, from his perspective, they had seemed insignificant. Minor scheduling conflicts. Practical necessities. Reading Charlotte's words revealed another reality entirely. What felt small to him had accumulated into years of quiet heartbreak for her. He continued reading. The entries grew more personal as time passed. Then he reached a page dated just 2 weeks before Benjamin's birth. Nathaniel stopped breathing. Charlotte described preparing the nursery, folding blankets, arranging books, choosing decorations. She wrote about anticipation, fear, excitement. Then came a passage written in noticeably shakier handwriting. I no longer wonder whether Nathaniel loves me. If he did, I think I would have seen it by now. The sentence struck harder than anything before it. Nathaniel stared at the page. Read it again. Then again. His hands tightened around the notebook. Charlotte had written those words before the labor, before the missed birth, before Clara, before the newspapers. She believed herself unloved long before the greatest crisis arrived. Because of him. Not rumors. Not missing letters. Him. Nathaniel rose abruptly and crossed the room. The study suddenly felt suffocating. Too small. Too warm. He stopped beside the window and stared into darkness. The gardens lay silent beyond the glass. Somewhere upstairs Charlotte was likely settling Benjamin for the night. Their son. The child he nearly lost the chance to know. The child whose first smile he had almost missed. Nathaniel pressed a hand against the window frame. A memory surfaced unexpectedly. Charlotte standing beside him on their wedding day. Nervous. Hopeful. Looking at him as though the future contained endless possibility. He remembered noticing it. He remembered understanding exactly what she hoped for. Companionship. Partnership. Love. And he remembered doing absolutely nothing to nurture any of it. The realization landed with devastating clarity. The missing letters explained misunderstandings. They did not explain neglect. They did not explain absence. They did not explain why Charlotte reached for him repeatedly while he remained emotionally distant. Nathaniel returned to the desk and opened the journal again. Near the back he discovered another entry. This one written during labor. The handwriting appeared uneven, exhausted. Certain words faded where tears had stained the page. Nathaniel's pulse quickened. Slowly he read. They keep saying he may still come. I do not think he will. The sentence blurred momentarily. Nathaniel blinked hard and continued. I am not angry anymore. That surprised me. I thought I would be. Instead I feel tired. I spent so many years waiting for him to choose us. Tonight I finally understand that waiting will not change anything. Nathaniel lowered the journal. The room disappeared around him. He could hear only the fire, only his own breathing, only those words repeating endlessly. Choose us. Charlotte had spent years hoping he would choose their family. Not over duty, not over responsibility. Simply choose them sometimes. And he had failed. The realization shattered something he had carried for most of his life. Nathaniel Blackwood had always believed himself honorable, responsible, dependable. He fulfilled obligations, protected estates, kept promises. Yet somehow he had neglected the people who mattered most. A knock sounded at the study door. Nathaniel did not answer. Moments later the door opened cautiously. Mrs. Whitaker stepped inside. She immediately stopped. Concern crossed her face. Your Grace. Nathaniel looked up. For several seconds he could not speak. The journal remained open before him. Charlotte's words visible upon the page. Mrs. Whitaker understood almost instantly. You found it. Nathaniel nodded once. Barely. The housekeeper approached slowly. I wondered whether you ever would. Nathaniel stared down at the journal again. Why did she keep this? His voice sounded unfamiliar. Rough. Mrs. Whitaker followed his gaze. Because she had no one else to tell. Silence filled the room. Nathaniel swallowed hard. Every letter, every journal entry, every missed moment seemed to gather around him at once. Not accusations. Truths. Quiet truths he had ignored for years. Mrs. Whitaker rested a gentle hand upon the desk. She loved you very much. Nathaniel closed his eyes. The statement should have offered comfort. Instead it felt unbearable. Because he finally understood the full weight of what Charlotte had given him. Patience. Loyalty. Hope. Years of it. And he had treated those gifts as though they would last forever. When he opened his eyes again, the journal remained before him. So did the final entry. So did the woman he had failed. Somewhere beyond the study walls, Benjamin laughed faintly in the distance. The sound drifted through the corridor. Small, happy, innocent. Nathaniel listened to it, then looked once more at Charlotte's words. For the first time in his life, the Duke of Ashbourne felt something he had spent years avoiding. Not guilt, not regret, grief. Grief for the marriage he should have built. Grief for the years Charlotte spent alone while standing beside him. Grief for the husband he could have been and chose not to become. And as the weight of that truth finally settled upon him, Nathaniel lowered his head into his hands and allowed the silence to break him. The morning of the London event arrived with unsettling clarity. The sky was bright, almost painfully so, as if the world itself had decided to reveal everything that had been hidden in shadows. Nathaniel stood before the mirror in his dressing room while his valet adjusted the final details of his coat. Black formal wear, crisp white shirt, controlled appearance. Every element carefully constructed to project authority. Yet nothing could conceal the tension in his expression. Today was not a social obligation. It was a confrontation. He had received confirmation the previous evening. Lady Victoria Blackwood had arranged a private gathering under the pretense of reconnecting with select members of society. But Nathaniel now understood the truth. It was not a gathering. It was a stage, and he was the final act. The carriage ride into London felt shorter than usual. Not because distance had changed, but because his thoughts no longer allowed distraction. Every passing street, every carriage, every pedestrian blurred into insignificance. He replayed the journal entries, Charlotte's words, the missing letters, the years of silence that had never been silence at all, but something deliberately shaped. When the carriage finally stopped outside the townhouse, Nathaniel did not hesitate. He stepped out immediately and ascended the stone steps. The doors opened before he reached them. Inside, the house was filled with guests. Soft music drifted from the drawing room. Laughter echoed across polished floors. Crystal glasses clinked in polite rhythm. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, perfectly controlled. Lady Victoria stood at the center of the room as though she owned the atmosphere itself. When she saw Nathaniel, her smile did not change, only sharpened slightly at the edges. "Nathaniel, you arrived exactly as expected." He approached her slowly. "Did I?" She tilted her head. "You always were punctual when matters concerned reputation." Nathaniel stopped a few feet away. His voice was quiet. "We need to speak privately." Lady Victoria's eyes flickered briefly toward the guests, then back to him. "Of course." She gestured toward an adjoining room. The doors closed behind them. The shift was immediate. Silence replaced music. Stillness replaced movement. Nathaniel did not waste time. "I have read the correspondence." For the first time that morning, something subtle shifted in her expression. Not fear, not surprise, calculation. "Which correspondence?" Nathaniel held her gaze. "All of it." Pause followed. Lady Victoria walked slowly toward the window. "I assume you are referring to your wife's letters. And mine." She exhaled lightly, almost amused. "How unfortunate." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "You intercepted them." Lady Victoria did not answer immediately. Instead, she studied the view outside as though considering whether rather than betrayal. "Interception is a strong word." Nathaniel stepped forward. "Then explain it." She turned back toward him, calm, composed, impossibly so. "I ensured unnecessary correspondence did not burden you during critical periods of your career." The words landed with deliberate precision. Nathaniel stared at her. "You decided what was unnecessary. I decided what was beneficial." Silence stretched between them. Nathaniel felt something inside him shift. Cold, sharp, controlled. "You isolated my wife." Lady Victoria's expression remained unchanged. "I protected your marriage from emotional distraction." The sentence almost made him laugh. Almost. Instead, he spoke slowly. "By removing her voice. By preserving your focus." Nathaniel took another step forward. "She was pregnant." "Yes." "Alone." A brief pause. Then Lady Victoria spoke with quiet certainty. "And you were building the foundation of an estate that supports thousands." The justification was flawless in its logic, and completely hollow in its humanity. Nathaniel looked at her as though seeing her for the first time. Not as a mother, not as a matriarch, but as something far more dangerous. Someone who believed control justified harm. "You never approved of her," he said quietly. Lady Victoria's gaze sharpened. I never approved of distraction. She is my wife. She was inexperienced. Nathaniel felt the last restraint inside him strain. She loved me. For the first time, something flickered in Lady Victoria's eyes. Not regret. Not sympathy. Annoyance. Love is not sufficient for survival in your position. Nathaniel turned away briefly. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, controlled, dangerous in its restraint. Do you understand what you have done? Lady Victoria straightened slightly. I ensured stability. Nathaniel looked back at her. You ensured loneliness. The words hung in the air, sharp, undeniable. For a brief moment, silence filled the room completely. The distant music from the other hall faded. The laughter outside seemed far away. Lady Victoria finally spoke. You are emotional. Nathaniel let out a slow breath. No. He stepped closer. I am clear. Something in his tone made her pause. Not fear. Awareness. You interfered in my marriage, he continued. You intercepted letters. You shaped perception. You controlled communication between husband and wife. His voice remained steady. Do you know what that means? Lady Victoria studied him carefully. It means I protected your future. Nathaniel shook his head slightly. It means you dismantled it. For the first time, discomfort flickered across her features. Brief, controlled, but present. Nathaniel reached into his coat and removed the journal. Charlotte's journal. He placed it on the table between them. Do you know what she wrote here? Lady Victoria did not move. Nathaniel continued. She wrote about waiting. Pause. Not for luxury. Not for attention. His voice softened slightly. For me. Lady Victoria looked at the journal without touching it. Nathaniel's tone hardened again. You did not protect me. Another step closer. You protected your own idea of who I should be. Silence. Then Lady Victoria spoke quietly. And have I been wrong? The question struck differently than the rest. Nathaniel paused. Just briefly. Because that was the most dangerous part. Not malice. Belief. Yes, he said finally. Lady Victoria did not respond immediately. The room felt smaller now. Heavier. Finally she spoke again. You will recover from this misunderstanding. Nathaniel stared at her. Something inside him settled completely. Not anger anymore. Decision. This is not a misunderstanding. He turned toward the door. Lady Victoria's voice followed him. Nathaniel. He stopped but did not turn. You will destroy your standing over sentiment. For the first time that day, Nathaniel smiled. Not warmly, not politely, but with clarity. No, he said. I will correct it. Then he opened the door and stepped back into the noise of society. The guests outside continued laughing. Unaware, uninterrupted. Nathaniel moved through them without hesitation. Conversations paused as he passed. Faces turned. Whispers began almost immediately, yet none of it reached him anymore, because for the first time reputation no longer carried weight. Truth did, and truth required action. That evening, back at Ashbourne Manor, Charlotte sat in the nursery while Benjamin slept peacefully in her arms. The fire burned softly nearby. The house was quiet. Nathaniel entered without announcement. Charlotte looked up. For a moment neither spoke. Then Nathaniel crossed the room slowly. Not as a duke. Not as a husband seeking forgiveness. But as a man who finally understood what he had lost. I spoke with her, he said quietly. Charlotte held his gaze. And? Nathaniel paused. Then answered with complete honesty. Everything is different now. Charlotte looked down at Benjamin briefly. Then back at him. Different does not always mean repaired. Nathaniel nodded. I know. And for the first time he truly did. Spring arrived slowly at Ashbourne Manor, not with sudden bloom, but with quiet persistence. Frost retreated from the edges of the gardens. Pale green crept back into the hedgerows. The air no longer carried the weight of winter, yet something heavier lingered inside the house itself. Time had moved forward. People had healed. Routines had returned. And still, nothing inside the manor felt entirely the same again. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the nursery doorway before entering, watching for a moment without announcing himself. Benjamin sat on the carpet surrounded by wooden toys. Charlotte was nearby, reading softly from a book with one hand while the other rested protectively on their son's back. The scene was ordinary in the most fragile sense of the word. Peaceful. Domestic. Yet Nathaniel understood now that peace was not the absence of distance. It was the result of rebuilding what distance had destroyed. He stepped inside quietly. Charlotte looked up first. Her expression did not change, but her awareness did. She closed the book gently. Benjamin noticed him a moment later. The baby's face lit with recognition that had taken months to form. Not sudden affection, not instant trust, but something real now. Familiarity. Nathaniel crouched slowly beside him. "Good morning." Benjamin studied him for a moment, then reached out, not fully but enough to acknowledge him. Nathaniel accepted the small hand carefully. It was warmer than he remembered, or perhaps he had simply not noticed before. Charlotte watched without interrupting. There was no hesitation in her anymore when it came to letting him try. Only observation. Nathaniel remained with Benjamin for several minutes, guiding him through simple play. The child laughed once. Soft, brief, but unmistakably genuine. Nathaniel felt it land somewhere deep inside him. Not triumph, not validation, something quieter, something earned. When Benjamin eventually leaned back toward Charlotte, Nathaniel did not react. He simply released his grip and allowed the moment to belong where it naturally returned. Charlotte closed the book fully this time. "He is learning you," she said calmly. Nathaniel nodded. "So am I." She studied him for a moment, then looked away toward the window. Outside, the gardens were beginning to bloom. "It takes time," she said. Nathaniel understood what she meant. Time had been the thing he had always assumed he controlled. Now it controlled everything that mattered. That afternoon, a carriage arrived at the estate without announcement. Mrs. Whitaker entered the study shortly after, her expression composed but alert. "Your Grace," she said quietly, "Lady Victoria has arrived." Nathaniel did not look up immediately. The name no longer carried surprise, only consequence. "Where is she?" "The drawing room." Nathaniel closed the document in front of him, then stood. "Has Charlotte seen her?" "Not yet." That was all he needed to hear. He crossed the hall without delay. The manor felt different as he moved through it. Not lighter, not heavier, clearer, as though the truth had rearranged the space itself. When he entered the drawing room, Lady Victoria stood near the window as if she had been waiting for him specifically. She turned slowly. Age had not diminished her composure. If anything, it had refined it. "Nathaniel." "Mother." There was no warmth in the exchange. No hostility either. Only recognition of what remained unresolved. She stepped toward him slightly. "I assume you have made your decision." Nathaniel did not hesitate. "Yes." Pause followed. Lady Victoria studied him carefully. "And does Charlotte agree with this decision?" Nathaniel met her gaze fully. "Charlotte is not a subject of your approval anymore." Something flickered in her expression. Subtle, controlled, but present. "I am still your mother, and I am no longer the man who allows you to define my marriage." Silence settled between them. Lady Victoria straightened slightly. "You are making a mistake." Nathaniel shook his head once. "I already made the mistake. I lived it for years." That answer landed differently. He could see it, not because it hurt her pride, but because it removed her certainty. For the first time, she had no immediate correction. Nathaniel continued, "You will no longer interfere in any correspondence, any decisions, any part of this household." Lady Victoria's voice cooled. "You are protecting her. I am correcting what was taken from her." The distinction mattered. She understood it immediately. Outside the room, footsteps approached. Charlotte appeared at the doorway, Benjamin resting against her shoulder. She paused when she saw Lady Victoria. The air shifted instantly. 3 years of tension condensed into a single silent moment. Lady Victoria's eyes moved briefly to the child, then back to Charlotte. "So this is the result." Charlotte did not respond. Nathaniel stepped slightly forward, not in defense, but in alignment. "This is my family." The words were simple, final. Lady Victoria looked between them. Something in her composure finally fractured. Not dramatically, not visibly to anyone else, but Nathaniel saw it. The loss of control she had never anticipated. "You are choosing her over your name," she said quietly. Nathaniel shook his head. "No," a pause. "I am choosing truth over convenience." Silence followed. Charlotte adjusted Benjamin gently in her arms. The child stirred but did not wake. Lady Victoria looked at Nathaniel one final time. "You will regret this." Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "I already regret what I ignored." That ended the conversation. Not because anyone left the room, but because nothing more needed to be said. Lady Victoria turned and walked out. Her footsteps faded down the corridor without urgency, but without return either. Charlotte remained still for a moment, then looked at Nathaniel. That was not easy. No, he stepped closer. But it was necessary. Benjamin shifted slightly between them. Charlotte adjusted him instinctively. Nathaniel watched the movement, then spoke more quietly. "I cannot change what I failed to do." Charlotte met his gaze. "No, but I can stop repeating it." A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, not resolved, simply honest. Charlotte finally turned toward the nursery. "He needs feeding." Nathaniel nodded. "I will come with you." She hesitated only briefly before continuing forward. He followed without expectation of being included in every step, but without hesitation about trying. In the nursery, sunlight filled the room in soft gold. Charlotte settled into the chair with Benjamin. Nathaniel remained standing at first, unsure where he belonged. Then, slowly, he took the chair beside her. Close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. Benjamin opened his eyes briefly, looked between them, then relaxed again against Charlotte. Nathaniel watched him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "He will not remember the beginning." Charlotte glanced at him. "No," Nathaniel nodded. "But I will." She studied him for a moment. "That is not always enough." He accepted that without argument. "Then I will make sure it becomes something more." Charlotte looked down at Benjamin again. Her voice softened. "We are not returning to what we were." Nathaniel did not hesitate. "I know." Another pause. "But we can become something else." Charlotte did not answer immediately. The room remained still except for the soft sound of the child breathing. Finally, she nodded once. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement of direction. And for the first time since everything had begun to unravel, Nathaniel did not feel like he was trying to recover the past. He felt like he was finally learning how to build something that might survive the future.